This is Flushing, or I should really say Flushing Cove, in Cornwall, United Kingdom. Nice place, a nice anchorage. And I thought I'd do this video to show you how you can use contrast to give you shape and form in your painting. Just to point out one or two things about the photograph. You can see we've got these buildings here. The roofs are sort of grey slate, but they're quite light. Obviously the sun's coming from the left hand side, and therefore if we put too much tone on them, we will tend to lose those a little bit. But fortunately we've got all this greenery, all these trees around the buildings, and that's quite dark, and therefore we can use that dark tone in the trees to give ourselves shape to the roofs of the building. So what I'm going to do is probably start off with a little bit of sky, drop that into the water, and then work on these the trees to give myself a bit of dark tone in those, a bit of contrast, and then work up the buildings after that. On the water, you can see in the photograph, it's sort of an emerald green, which it often is down in Cornwall. The problem with that sometimes is it's very difficult to get that sort of translucent effect. So I also find that if you use too much maybe the Viridian green and so forth in that to get that translucent effect, you end up with a colour which just simply comes out and hits you and doesn't actually add to the painting. And so I'm going to keep my water reflecting what the sky is, which is blue, but capture the light in the water by having richer, warmer blues down here in the bottom of the painting, lighter at the top, and maybe actually going to virtually white at the top to go in with the beach, and therefore capture that that light. The other thing I'm going to do as well is add some boats to the painting. There are a couple of dinghies on the foreshore here. I'll have some dinghies. This one here is obviously a sailing dinghy, racing dinghy, and it's sort of up on a trolley of some sort, which never looks quite right, and therefore I'm going to omit that, but then have a couple of yachts moored in the water. So I've searched my photographs on the web and so forth and come up with a couple of likely candidates with some nice reflections here. And actually this photograph shows up quite well the way in which you can do water to capture the light. So you can see that the blue here is actually quite light, and as it gets closer to the eye it gets deeper, darker, and perhaps a little bit warmer. And by doing that you capture the light in the water towards the rear of the painting. So I'm going to use that effect in my art. So colours, I'm going to use yellow ochre for a lot of the beach work and so forth, and the other two earth colours, burnt umber and burnt sienna. For my blues, cobalt blue, and to warm it up, French ultramarine blue. And then for the greens, I'll use lemon yellow and this green apatite genuine, which is a Daniel Smith colour as well. I might use some reds and so forth at the same time. Now I've done the drawing. And you can see here I've got my two moored yachts. I've just lightly sketched in their reflection, a couple of dinghies on the foreshore, and the buildings and so forth, and highlighted roughly where this greenery is going to go. So I'm going to start by wetting the sky and the tree area. Wetting the sky allows a little bit of time. I don't have to work quite so quickly. when I put in clouds and so forth. I should actually be using a bigger brush here, but never mind. And work that around the buildings. And then we'll drop some in the water as well. There's already a bit of blue from another painting in the on the paper already, but that'll get covered up, so it doesn't matter. Bring that up to the beach. Just look back on that just to make sure that I haven't got any dry patches. That's fine. Good. So now I'm going to start off with some cobalt blue and some simple blue sky with clouds. I want it to be quite light as it comes down towards the tree, and that in doing that I'm going to capture a bit of light in the sky between the dark of the trees and the clouds. So very, very simple sky. I'm just using the one colour there. I don't want the sky to take over the painting. That's fine. I could use a tissue there and just blank out a couple of clouds, but I don't think I'll worry about that. That's looking okay. And then I'm going to do the same down here in the water. Drop in some cobalt. It's going to be a calm water, so no need for too many waves or anything at all, just a couple of ripples. And then use that slightly stickier cobalt blue just for a couple of ripples. Getting lighter up there. And because I wetted the paper, I can move the paint around a little bit without too much worry of getting a lot of hard edges. Now I'm going to just drop a little bit of ultramarine into that cobalt, which will warm it up a little bit towards the front here. See that? Ultramarine, French ultramarine being really the warmer of the blues. That's fine. So we'll leave it at that. Now, the top has started to dry. I'm just going to dry it off a little bit more in the cloud area. I don't want it too wet, so I'm just going to use a bit of tissue there. And now I'm going to work in some of these trees. Start off, I want them quite light at the top, so I'm starting off with some lemon yellow. I wouldn't normally have such dark pencil marks, but I've put those on there so that they get picked up by the camera. So it's starting off. I'll bring that down now towards the building. Just work my way around buildings with lemon yellow. I've got to work fairly quickly because I want to drop in some of the green apatite genuine before this goes completely dry. Again, perhaps I should be using a bigger brush. So dropping in this green apatite genuine. I want it to go quite dark in some places, so I might add a bit of burnt umber to it. Later on. There, you can see that beginning to bring out the buildings now, bring out the lightness of the roofs where the light is catching it. And to show you how dark I might go, just use stickier green. And the darker I make the trees, the lighter the roofs will appear. I'm giving myself contrast in tone. Yeah, saying okay. So I carried on with the greenery. Using the it's a Daniel Smith colour, this green apatite genuine, which it's the only green that I'll use directly from the tube. But you can mix it up with burnt umber, as you can see here. That gives you a nice dark greeny brown colour. But you can see now how by getting darker and darker, especially around the buildings, the roofs are beginning to stand out because they're so light. There's a lot more detail I can put in there. There's one or two tree trunks and branches and so forth that will eventually come. There is a bit more greenery around the bottoms of the building, so I'll just put that in now. Some grassy areas. So starting off again with the lemon yellow. That's a sort of a sea wall just here. A little bit more grassy area then. That's because they're lighter grasses. These are going to be lighter in green anyway, so I won't put too much of the green apatite genuine on those. Bring that down there. So as I say, just a little bit of the, whilst that's still wet, a little bit of green. There we go, that's enough. Good. That's fine. Okay. I think I'll put in this sea wall now, so I'm going to start off with yellow ochre. And this is in the middle distance, so it wants to come forward a little bit. Notice that as I get towards the edges of the painting, I tend to go quite light, just to let the painting come to a natural end to the sides. Now, whilst that's still wet, we'll add a bit of texture to that, so a bit of burnt umber. That little bit there's in shadow, so was that. So we're very much working wet into wet here. And don't be afraid to leave some of the areas which may appear coloured in the photograph. Don't be afraid, if it gives you the right effect, to leave them white on the paper. Just want to sharpen up those shadows. I'm going to use some burnt umber and cobalt blue. Okay, so I'm going to put in the beach area, yellow ochre, or if you've got it, a little bit of Naples yellow actually is quite good for this sort of area. Leaving the dinghies on the shore. One or two burnt umber marks into the beach area, just give it a little bit of texture, especially down near the water's edge. Come back to that later on. So what I'm going to do now is, we've got rocks on the right hand side here, but I'm going to do the buildings first because they are really, I suppose in many respects, a large part of the subject of what we're painting, so I want to make sure that they're going to stand out. Now the roofs are slate, and slate can be very, very shiny and almost white when the light's on it, so I'm going to use cobalt blue start off with, but very, very light, and the actual sun itself, the light is coming from the left hand side, so these roofs here are very light. This roof here is in shadow, so I'll just start off there, start off on the dark sides with very light cobalt blue, and then take a little bit of burnt umber just to give it a little bit of, not too much. Very easy to make these roofs just a little bit too dark. If you make them too dark, then they'll have the same tone as the surrounding greenery and they will tend to disappear in the painting, but just bring that up a little bit in tone, not too much. That's okay, that's alright. Same with this one here. That's fine, okay. And then with the roofs that are facing the light, just starting from the bottom, got a little bit of cobalt, and just wet that out, spread it up, just to give it a little bit of texture there. So there's hardly any colour on that at all. Spreading it up a little bit with water, so that the shape of the roof is really dictated by the greenery behind it. Now, So the right hand side of the buildings is in shadow. So burnt umber, a little bit of cobalt blue. We can start to put those in. With buildings like this, I always overemphasize the tonal difference, and it helps to make the building look really, really three-dimensional. This house over here is white, so we'll deal with that slightly differently. We've got a veranda area here, so this is the shadows underneath. This must be a boathouse, I think. Right. Then we've got large window doors on the side. And what I'm going to do is mix up sticky burnt umber, cobalt blue, giving myself a very, very dark grey or black. Which I can use to put in some detail work. Don't need to do too much. There's a veranda along here, and I have to say that although this veranda is dark anyway, some verandas and where you have railings and so forth, which are painted white, sometimes I just change them and paint them black. Or I use a white pen. Okay, so those buildings now are beginning to stand out. Don't be tempted to paint black lines around everything. Stop it and start it. Okay. Otherwise it just looks as though you're outlining everything and it just doesn't look good. So begin to put a little bit more dark down here just to emphasize the sea wall. Now this building here is white, therefore on the shadow sides it'll reflect the sky, so there should be a bit of cobalt blue, but just be careful. If you do it too much, if you use too dark a tone of cobalt blue, you will send the picture back a bit, to send the shape of the house or the building back and make it see. That's just enough. I wouldn't want to do any more than that. Same on this one here. That's fine, that's fine. This wall here actually in the photograph is dark, but if I do that, it's just going to detract from the building, I think. Right, I'm going to do some work now on the yachts, boats. So starting on those, first of all on the foreshore, the dinghies, I'm just going to use some burnt umber, and all I'm doing is going for simple shapes here. Because that side is facing away from the light, that's dark, and I'll just simply put in one or two little marks. So that's the transom there, the back end, slightly lighter because it's facing the sun, and then leaving as much light as I can. That's all that's needed, and the same for the one beside it. It's just to indicate that there is something there. That's fine, that's all that's required really. A few more marks on the foreshore. That's fine. Okay. Now this yacht here has a white hull, well I'll give it a white hull anyway, which means that to make it 3D, you give it a bit of shadow work. It'll be reflecting the sky and the sea around it, so I'll just put in a little bit of cobalt blue. Just to help give the white side some shape. I'll make the cabin side and the cockpit wood, so some burnt umber for that. And I always find that with these things, the sort of detail work, the less you do, the more it looks right. So just one or two little marks, nothing more than that really is all that's required. Leaving quite a lot of white. And that's almost enough for that boat. The sails are down obviously, and very often the mainsail will be underneath a cover lying on the boom. So just put that in, some cobalt. If you start putting too much detail work in, it becomes a mess. So I'm just going to put in, to support the boom very often, not always, but you might have what we call boom gallows, sort of scissor. And I'm going to go for a dark mast. Some artists are able to do this sort of thing in one very clean stroke, and you can use rulers and all sorts of things to help you out. I always find that sort of thing tends to make a mess. And although it's a mast, you don't need to have it as a continuous line. You can stop it and start it. Okay, that's enough for that, I think. I haven't put any rigging in yet. What I will do, just to bring the eye in, I'll use a little bit of Turner. Turner would often drop a little bit of red into his paintings, just to bring the eye in. So give it a red boot top. And the boat beside it is, for me, just a wooden day boat, so I'm just going to start off there with some yellow ochre. It'll be wood planked. Burnt umber. Okay. Very often the sails on these old day boats are tan or red in colour, so just a bit of contrast there. Again, the boom gallows, scissor shape. I'm using a fairly new thin Maestro brush. Otherwise you would use a rigger. Again, I might just use a little bit of red for the waterline, the boot top. That's fine. Okay. I'll come back and do a bit more detailed work on those a little later on. And now we've got these rocks to the right hand side here. The light's coming in from the left, so the rocks will reflect a fair amount of light in them. So I'm going to start off with a nice warm yellow ochre, just to get them going. Some burnt umber. Not putting too much detail in. I don't want the rocks to take away. If you put too much detail in, you'll take away from the main subject, which is the buildings and the boats. So I don't want to put anything in there that's going to take the eye away from those main subjects. But getting darker as I go, so more burnt umber, and then some cobalt blue added at the same time to give myself a darker. Especially down by the water, working wet into wet. I'll come back to that again in a moment and put some more detail work in. Now I'm going to go in with pure burnt umber just to warm them up a bit and bring them further closer to the eye. It's important to try and get tonal perspective in your paintings, and objects which are close to the eye need to be warmer, more intense. Leaving a little bit of light on top of the rocks. There are various ways of doing that. Some people use credit cards to scratch out wet paint and that sort of thing, and that's perfectly okay. That's better. I love this Winsor & Newton burnt umber. It's got a lot of red in it, and it does help to bring things forward. As far as I'll go there. We're getting close to the end of the painting now. We want some reflections in the water for the rocks and for the yachts and the boats and so forth. I want to put in some rigging, some tree trunks, that sort of thing. So I'll do a little bit of work on the yacht reflections. So I want them to be, I want the lines and the details there to be shimmery. There'll be anchor rope going off there. A little bit of cobalt. A little bit of reflected red. Just enough detail to show what it is, and no more than that. Put this other boat reflected. Sometimes I like to leave a little white line between the object and the reflection itself. Okay. And then we want to reflect the masts. So wavy, slightly broken lines. Fine. And then we want reflections for the rocks on the right hand side. Again, I tend to leave not a constant gap, but just a little gap there. Good. And we want to add some of these tree trunks over here. Again, don't have constant stop-start. But that gives us some more verticals. Verticals in a painting I like because they tend to join the bottom of the painting to the top. So they're useful items for doing that. Don't want to overdo those trunks, as I say. And they want to sort of disappear as they come down. That's fine. Just intensify that green slightly. That's fine. Then using that same fine brush again, I'm just going to drop in some rigging. Just hinting at it, not putting it all in completely. You got some cross trees. Just hinting at it. So there's our painting more or less completed. You can see what I was saying right at the beginning, that we've defined the shape of the roofs of these buildings by the dark behind them. And you can find that in so many paintings, where you define the shape of something by something that's behind it, which has got a darker tone perhaps. I've made this headland quite warm, quite dark, bring it forward, so I get this feeling of tonal perspective in the painting. I've done a little bit more detail work on the boat, but not too much, just a little bit there, so that the two balance each other out, the headland there and the yachts. I've added just a little touch of white splatter here and there, just to get the light reflecting off of shiny rocks and so forth. Even just a little touch of red splatter just to help draw the eye in. And as a final touch, I've used a pencil to put in a group of seagulls coming in. I've lined these three up to help the eye come down and into the main focal point, which is the boats, the yachts, and the buildings. And it's always a good idea when you do put in things like the seagulls or whatever else, that you put in odd numbers, so 1, 3, 5, and so forth. It's okay to have, you know, sort of 2 buildings, 2 yachts. If I'd had room, I might have put a third one in, because again, very often I find odd numbers are better in a painting, composition-wise. Anyway, I've enjoyed painting that. I hope you've enjoyed watching, and I wish you every success in your own artwork. Thank you very much.